Hey everybody, my name is Matt Dawkins, new to Evangel Fellowship International, and it's an honor to get to bring you guys in on a series of meet and greet conversations where we're going to sit down with the leaders of Evangel Fellowship International, literally from all over the world. We're going to get to see a little bit behind the curtain of how in the world EFI got started and how it continues to thrive and continues to fight to be relationally connected for global impact. And today is a special day. It's day one. It's the first day of these conversations, and we get to sit down with the chairman of the board, Pastor Philip Miles. How you doing this morning?
Matt, doing good. Looking forward to chatting with you and talking a little bit about EFI.
We're going to talk a lot about your story. We're going to talk a lot about the genesis of EFI today, but I want to start with this big picture of what I know about you, which is way more than I know about a lot of the other folks, right? I know that you've got over 40 years in ministry, which is a big deal. You've got, you're now a leader, a chairman of the board of a massive organization that pastors ministry leaders in churches all over the world. And no, in June, you celebrated 50 years of marriage.
Yes,
so you look back on those accomplishments and so many more that I don't know about. And I'm curious what you would say is your greatest accomplishment, your greatest success.
Well, probably the 50 years of marriage. That was, I think any time we can negotiate as a couple for any length of time, it shows you how good God is and how He helps us and works with us, gives us miracles along the way so that we can, love each other, grow together as a couple. And then everything else sort of falls in behind that, and I think that being able to raise up my family and see my children start to step into their destiny.
Many of the conversations that you and I've had in the past, I know a lot about your dad and being the founder of EFI. I think it's an incredible thing. He has a great name. You have a great name. But you came up in that house. You came up under your dad going to church, your dad's church, a preacher's kid.
Yeah.
Take us back to the early days and what was that like?
Well, in the early days, we were part of a denomination, and there was nothing very spectacular. It was very much just a routine. You got up, you went to church, and all that changed in the late 60s when we had a revival come to the church with my dad, who just pastored a denominational church. Everything clipped along, but Dad had a season in his life where he was very discouraged because nothing was happening. He just got tired of the routine and began to have some prayer times, and he had divided up the church of prayer partners. And basically, he was either going to see God move or he was going to do something else. All of a sudden, God began to bring revival to the church, and it transformed the church. It transformed our lives, and ended up building this massive church. And of course, all this was happening not just at Evangel, but it was starting to happen all throughout the United States and around the world. It was the charismatic movement. And EFI got its birth where what happened primarily was a lot of denominational pastors, once they experienced this revival, they were not welcome in their denominations anymore. And so a lot of them would come to Dad and say, "Would you be our pastor? We need help. We need a covering." And so Dad would, try to encourage them to go somewhere, or he would try to meet with them. And finally, there was just so many, he said, We've got to organize this, And so that's how it started. Dad himself, probably one of the most humble people I've ever met. He and Mom had a phenomenal marriage. I never heard them raise their voice at each other.
Wow.
It's really hard to believe.
Yeah.
And they just set such a powerful example of integrity. My dad was ruthless about keeping his word and not over-promising and things like this. And when God opened the door for him for Russia, it was just all on, and that was really, for a lot of people, their introduction to EFI was having, making trips to Russia. And Dad was so passionate about it, if you gave Dad any eye contact, he would say, hey, I think you need to go to Russia. And so he got tons and tons of people to go to Russia. And thank God, out of the hundreds of churches that were planted, now we're not allowed to go. And so, but all the churches that I've been able to stay in contact with, they're flourishing. So we've got some solid roots as a fellowship, and people should be happy about that. There's no, it's a beautiful thing not to have any skeletons in the closet, and not to have any regrets, to be able to just have something to build on. And that's really what we're trying to do, is build on my dad's legacy.
Wow. Well, let's not get too far I'm ready to talk about the future and what's coming up, but I want to hang back for just a second, because I know for a lot of the pastors and ministry leaders that are listening in on this conversation, there are things that are going to connect with them. And one of those things is if you could trace back in your life to a moment or a season where you know that God made it clear to you that full-time ministry is what he had for you. Take us back to that moment.
Well, I was in college. I went to Bible college mainly because my parents wanted me to. And I didn't really have any goals in life at the time. And so it was either, why not? So I just went. And while I was there at this Bible college, I was got around some very rebellious, my roommate being one of them, wild and rebellious. And it really soured my faith. And it seemed like everywhere I looked, there were just hypocrites. And I was young and immature, and it just knocked my feet out from under me. And so I remember coming home for Christmas break, and I knew how much Dad wanted me to be there, but I sat down with Dad in his office, and I said, Dad, if I go back to that Bible college, I'm not sure I'll ever be a Christian. And he said, why don't you stay home, go to junior college? And it felt like a ton of bricks fell off of me. So for a year, that's what I did. For a year, I went to church. I felt nothing. I was dead. But out of respect for my parents, I would show up. And about the end of the year, the Lord visited me. And it was a very powerful moment in the backyard of my house and in Spartanburg. And he began to ask me deep questions about what is life. And I was, of course, clueless, and so he was kind enough to answer it for me. And he said, Philip, after a couple of days of just asking me over and over, what is life? What is life? Then finally, about the third day, he said, life is just a preparation for eternity. And for me, I knew that's what he meant was, that's what you need to start doing with your life. You need to give the rest of your life for preparation for eternity. Wow. So it was a very clear, simple call of God. And, I've never looked back. I went back to the same college, had the same hypocrites, but it was like water off a duck's back then, because I had a mission. So it was good.
Wow. And I don't want to, we're going to have multiple conversations for sure. So there are going to be some things that I know that I'd love to talk about, but I want to honor everyone's time. You went on to plant a church right here in Conway, South Carolina. We're sitting inside the facility that you pastored from almost 40 years, that I also had the honor of pastoring for some time. And you've experienced a lot inside of ministry as a leader, as a pastor, as a husband, as a dad, as a friend. And I'm wondering if we couldn't just take a few minutes to talk to maybe a young pastor or a struggling pastor, as I'm sure you'd say, I've been there, I've done that. If you could just take a couple of minutes and just speak into them, any advice you'd give them as they're looking to do, maybe to accomplish something as great as you have.
Well, a couple of things. One is, for a good while, I wanted to duplicate what my dad had at Spartanburg. It was a lot of pressure. And I literally felt like, even though they were in Spartanburg, I still felt like we were under the shadow of Evangel Cathedral. And so I'd like to say to guys starting out in ministry, don't compare yourself to anybody else. only the Lord knows what He's put inside of you. And so it was a wonderful thing when God really set me free from that. I think another thing too that's really important is it's good to go to conferences. It's good to get ideas. But what really is going to work is what God speaks to your heart. And I'll tell you what, I have drugged this church through more great ideas, cool ideas. And we would come and I would try to implement it. And for 6 months, as long as I had the energy, we would drive that thing and it would be, it would be okay and it would bear a little fruit, but after 6 months, because it so was not us, we all wore out. He pulled up the white flag and gave up. And so what has worked for us over the 40 years is the things that God spoke to my heart. That this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to do it. Those things are actually still bearing fruit today. And so I'd encourage you, young pastors, trust your ability to hear from the Lord and go with it full on, whether anybody else is doing it or not doing it. That's what God's calling you to do. That's where you're going to have the most fruit.
That's great advice. I feel like I could take that where I am now as well. Thank you. I feel like we drift towards comparison. If it's not a conscious decision to not compare, we do it. So I appreciate that advice. I'm thinking about the wisdom that you have and all of our leaders as well with EFI have, that they love having the opportunity to pour into young pastors, aspiring pastors all over the world. We've got a conference coming up October 21st through the 23rd. We've got we're going to be hanging out in a beautiful place, Ridgecrest Conference Center. And for those that are watching that are looking for some connection time with seasoned pastors, with ministry leaders, you're going to find that. And I want to talk a little bit about the theme of this year's conference. People have seen Building Bridges.
Right.
So I'd love for you just to talk for a few minutes about how you land on the theme of a conference, but then also talk a little bit about what does Building Bridges mean?
Well, it's the way Jesus did. It's how He ministered, and it's how the apostles ministered. Whenever they would go into a community, they would look for a person of peace to build a bridge to. And once that bridge was built, then they built their church upon that. And that's how they created, the churches that we have. And so building bridges is a way for us to take what God gives us, not trying to make something happen, but to recognize, where we go, recognize the man of peace, to recognize the open door that God lays open before us, and simply walking through that. That's where we have borne most of our fruit as a fellowship, is just being sensitive, looking, where is the open door? Where are people saying, hey, would you please come? And would you please help us? And then once we go and we sense an affinity of spirit, I'm telling you, then it's all on. Then we've learned how to have a mutual ministry, mutual giving, mutual sharing, and therefore the places we go and minister, because they're able to give, it maintains their dignity, and then we're able to give. It gives us opportunity to use the resources that we've been entrusted with to make an eternal difference. And so that's really kind of what is unique about EFI, is that we're not just about building the local church, but we feel like that's part of the vision, but part of the vision is the Great Commission that every church, I think, needs to own and incorporate to their life.
I love that. I've talked at length about building bridges, and I wanted people to get a chance to hear from you on that. And the thing that really resonated with me was this idea that we tend to walk into ministry sometimes with it, if you build it, they will come mentality.
Right.
And it doesn't take long for a pastor to get trapped inside the four walls of his church.
Right.
With getting busy doing other things.
Right.
We get busy with meetings. We get busy with activities and programs and all those that we have to manage. And we forget that outreach involves getting out going out.
That's right, and that's the whole concept of a bridge. It's getting from where we are to where God wants us to be. And once we can do that, then we can transport the gospel. And so we've got to build that another word would be connection. You know, you've got to build a connection to the places where God is sending us to be able to carry the good news forward. And so at the conference, we're going to be able to share all kinds of ways that people have been building bridges and how it's working, the fruit it's been bearing. And for a lot of churches, you might be surprised, but some of the biggest impacts in our fellowship are churches that are relatively small in size. But they have such a heart for missions that it's like everything they set themselves out to do, God supernaturally provides for them, and they've been able to make a tremendous impact. Wow. So there's really no excuses for not being engaged and and have a part of the whole global mission that God's given us.
Well, we're getting to sit down with you, and I know we'll get to hear from you at the conference, and we have an unbelievable speaker lineup. We're going to be sitting down with them, getting to know them as well. But we're going to eat together. We're going to worship together. We're going to learn together. We're going to explore the beautiful rolling hills and mountains around the retreat center. Yeah. We're going to have some fun together. We're going to make sure we also include a link to register in the description, so you guys make sure you check that out. But don't wait. Make the decision now and go ahead and start preparing now for an amazing October 21st to the 23rd. Pastor Philip, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Matt.
Like I said, I think this is the beginning of many, many conversations together. But thank you guys for joining, and stay tuned for more conversations. We'll see you soon.